They watched him fail under fluorescent lights, surrounded by mirrors that reflected judgment more clearly than muscle. The barbell rattled, stalled, and dipped as if gravity itself had singled him out for correction. A few quiet chuckles drifted across the gym floor, soft but sharp, the kind that never asked permission before cutting. To them, he was just another man misjudging his strength, another ego collapsing between steel plates and rubber mats. They did not know his name. They did not ask. They simply saw a body that refused to perform on command, and in that refusal, they made their verdict. Weak. The digital clock above the squat rack ticked forward with clinical indifference. Seconds passed. No one in the room noticed how carefully he tracked them, how his breathing aligned with that rhythm, how time itself mattered more to him than the weight trembling inches from his chest. He released the bar with control, guiding it back into place as though restraint were a discipline rather than a consolation prize. Sweat traced deliberate lines down his forearms, disappearing into frayed wrist wraps that had seen years they could not explain. His breathing slowed before anyone could notice it had ever quickened. There was no outburst, no slammed metal, no wounded pride on display. Only silence. Not the awkward kind. The practiced kind. Silence, for him, was never emptiness. It was structure. Across the room, mirrors framed bodies built for admiration, inflated with confidence and noise. Muscles flexed unnecessarily, phones emerged for documentation, laughter echoed with permission. His reflection did not belong among them. Narrow shoulders beneath a plain gray shirt. A frame that suggested effort but not dominance. Power folded inward, like a sealed letter addressed to no one. The gym demanded spectacle. He offered refusal. Someone muttered that he should drop the weight. Another suggested a different program. Advice flowed freely to those who looked like they needed saving. He nodded politely, eyes lowered, absorbing the performance of concern without explanation. He wiped his hands, adjusted the plates, and lay back beneath the bar again. The attempt was identical. Calculated. Controlled. The bar rose an inch, hovered in a suspended moment that seemed almost cruel, then settled back into its cradle. A clean failure. Predictable. Acceptable. A few people lost interest immediately. Failure without drama bored them. They turned back to their own mirrors, their own contests. He sat up slowly, rolled his shoulders, and checked the clock again. Everything was on time. What none of them saw was the calculation behind his eyes. The deliberate limitation. The invisible boundary he refused to cross. Strength, to him, was not measured by what could be lifted, but by what must never be revealed. Years earlier, another clock had ticked in a different room. No mirrors there. No music. Just concrete walls, red lighting, and the low hum of equipment designed for outcomes, not aesthetics. In that place, failure had not been tolerated. Limits were not suggestions. They were lines drawn in blood, policy, and consequence. He had learned then that attention was dangerous. That excellence could attract risk faster than incompetence. He learned the cost of being noticed, the price of being remembered. One moment of visible superiority had shifted expectations permanently, and expectations, once set, became traps. That lesson stayed with him long after the uniforms were folded away. The gym was perfect camouflage. No one questioned quiet weakness. No one interrogated restraint. Here, effort without results was invisible, and invisibility was safety. He gathered his things with the same economy he applied to movement. Gloves folded. Bottle capped. No lingering. As he stood, a man nearby smirked openly, shaking his head as if disappointment were communal property. He met the man's eyes briefly, offering neither apology nor challenge. Just acknowledgement. Then he turned away. At the front desk, a television murmured with the afternoon news. Headlines scrolled about conflicts overseas, about operations unnamed and outcomes officially unclear. Analysts spoke confidently about capabilities they had never seen. He did not look directly at the screen, but his stride adjusted to the cadence of the broadcast, memory syncing with sound. Certain phrases tightened his jaw. Certain omissions relaxed it. Outside, the air felt heavier, as though the sky itself carried weight. He paused near his car, not from fatigue, but from awareness. Somewhere beyond the parking lot and the steady flow of traffic, There existed rooms without windows and files without full sentences. In those files, his name appeared in fragments, redacted lines, numbers without units. Somewhere, his limits were defined not by what he could not do, but by what should never be required again. Somewhere, people trained with the knowledge that if something went wrong, he might be called. And if he was called, there would be no room for failure, no mirrors to negotiate with, no laughter to absorb the tension. Only outcome. Here, though, he was just another man leaving the gym. Shoulders slightly slumped. Expression neutral. Lifting gloves dangling casually from his fingers. He blended seamlessly into the afternoon crowd, another figure absorbed by errands and obligations. The judgment he left behind followed him only briefly before dissolving, replaced by louder failures and more entertaining struggles. The gym believed it had measured him accurately. Steel and mirrors had delivered their verdict. The numbers were simple. The conclusion was comfortable. But elsewhere, far from fluorescent lights and casual assessments, his limits were written in language that did not allow for laughter. Language that assumed consequence. Those who understood that language understood why it would never be spoken aloud, why it could never be tested publicly, and why the man who carried it chose, every day, to look weak on purpose. He had not always been invisible. There was a time when his presence altered a room before he spoke, when instructors paused mid-sentence and peers recalculated their posture without knowing why. That version of him existed before he understood the cost of being seen. Before he learned that strength, once identified, is rarely left alone. He grew up where attention was currency and scarcity made it dangerous. Apartments stacked too closely together. Hallways that echoed with arguments and apologies in equal measure. Silence, there, was not peace but strategy. You learned when to be quiet, when to move, when to disappear into routine. His body learned early what his mouth never had to articulate. Economy of motion. Stillness as protection. While other kids chased size, chased notice, chased noise, he learned control. He carried groceries for neighbors without complaint. He walked siblings to school without asking for praise. Muscles formed gradually, not from obsession but from necessity. Strength grew dense, practical, unadorned. When recruiters eventually arrived, they did not single him out. They never did. He stood among others, average height, average frame, expression neutral. He answered questions plainly. He did not volunteer stories. He did not sell himself. What forced the second look were the results. Numbers rarely lie, but they often confuse. His physical evaluations showed capacity that did not match presentation. Endurance curves that refused to taper. Stress responses that flattened instead of spiking. Psychological profiles that returned unsettling calm under simulated chaos. Not confidence. The kind that unsettles people trained to expect panic. Selection was not dramatic. It was narrowing. One day there were many. The next, fewer. Names disappeared from bunks. Gear sat unclaimed. Excuses circulated quietly. Injury. Family emergency. Wrong fit. He learned quickly not to ask. Survival depended on forward focus. Training stripped people down to essentials. Sleep deprivation blurred identity. Hunger sharpened impulse. Authority tested obedience not with volume, but with contradiction. Orders that conflicted. Scenarios without solutions. Silence where guidance should have been. Others struggled against uncertainty. He accepted it. Uncertainty, he understood, was simply a condition, not an obstacle. He moved through it without demanding resolution. That adaptability became his signature long before anyone named it. Instructors noticed without acknowledging. That was worse than praise. Praise faded. Attention lingered. He felt eyes track him during drills, felt expectations forming like weather systems overhead. He learned then to adjust output. To finish strong, but not first. To succeed, but not spectacularly. To blend success into the group so it could not be isolated. It worked until it didn't. The incident came without warning and without audience. A night operation built on assumptions that did not survive first contact. Variables shifted. Plans collapsed. The margin for error vanished. In that narrowing space, hesitation would have cost lives. He did not hesitate. He acted because the moment demanded it, not because he wanted recognition. His decisions were clean, decisive, unflinching. He applied force where necessary and restraint where it mattered more. When it was over, people were alive who should not have been. Evidence was gone that should never exist. The mission concluded itself around him, almost incidental to his presence. Afterward, no one spoke of it openly. But something changed. Doors opened without explanation. Assignments arrived with fewer details and higher consequences. His evaluations were no longer discussed aloud. Commendations existed, but without ceremony, buried under language that suggested teamwork while implying something else entirely. That was when he learned the discipline of concealment. He learned that capability, once confirmed, becomes expectation. Expectation becomes dependency. Dependency becomes exploitation. To survive long-term, he would need to appear ordinary. Useful, but not exceptional. Reliable, but not indispensable. So he practiced failure. Safe failure. Failure that satisfied observers without endangering outcomes. He learned how to miss margins intentionally. How to arrive second. How to let others take credit without resentment. Ego, he discovered, was optional. Survival was not. Eventually, the uniform came off. Not with celebration, not with regret. Just transition. Civilian life required a different camouflage, but the principle remained. Visibility invited questions. Questions invited history. History invited risk. Gyms were ideal. Offices too. Any environment where people measured worth with blunt tools. Numbers on bars. Titles on doors. Volume in conversation. He gave them exactly what they expected to see. Nothing more. At night, his training continued, but privately and precisely. Grip strength until tendons burned. Breath control measured in minutes, not reps. Balance drills in darkness. Metrics that had no audience and no translation. His body stayed ready, coiled beneath deliberate softness. Sometimes, he caught his reflection and barely recognized it. Not because it was weak, but because it was incomplete by design. A mask grown comfortable. The gym patrons saw only surface. They mistook restraint for deficiency. They assumed effort without spectacle meant lack of capacity. That misunderstanding protected everyone involved. Weakness, he knew, had never protected anyone. But being perceived as weak had. The call arrived the way they always did, stripped of drama and insulated from interpretation. No classified language spoken aloud. No code words that could be misheard. Just a time, a location, and a pause long enough to confirm he understood exactly what was being asked without being told. He answered with a single word and returned the phone to his pocket. The conversation ended before it could be remembered. He finished his coffee. It had gone lukewarm, but he drank it anyway. Habit mattered. Routine mattered. Inside his chest, nothing surged or tightened. There was no adrenaline spike, no cinematic rush. Instead, alignment settled in quietly, like pieces of machinery sliding into place. Muscles remembered their purpose. Breath adjusted without instruction. His mind narrowed, shedding unnecessary weight. That morning, the gym was louder than usual. New faces crowded the benches. Fresh enthusiasm echoed off the walls, accompanied by overconfidence and heavy music. He followed his routine precisely, down to the minute. Same warm-up. Same controlled attempts. Same visible failure. He noticed a man watching him between sets, the look unmistakable. Thinly veiled contempt, sharpened by comparison. The kind reserved for men who take up space without earning it. The man lifted heavier, louder, announcing effort with every repetition. When he finished, he glanced over again, checking whether his dominance had been acknowledged. It hadn't. The bar hovered over his chest and stalled, exactly as planned. He racked it calmly and sat up, breathing steady. Failure, on schedule. He checked the clock. Still on time. He left early, citing a headache he did not have. No one questioned it. Weak men were allowed excuses. The drive carried him away from the city, away from exits with names and landmarks. Pavement thinned to gravel. Cell service faded without complaint. When he reached the building, it looked like nothing at all. No signage. No perimeter drama. Just concrete and quiet. He parked among identical vehicles and waited. Inside, the air changed. Not colder. Heavier. Quiet here had density. It pressed inward rather than spreading out. He moved through corridors without direction, stopping only when someone else stopped first. No greetings were exchanged. None were needed. The briefing room held no insignia, no flags, no symbols of identity. Just maps layered with translucent markings, coordinates overlapping like fingerprints. He stood where indicated, hands behind his back, posture precise but unremarkable. The mission came in fragments. Enough to act. Never enough to explain. Targets were referred to obliquely. Objectives described by outcome, not method. Contingencies assumed competence. He listened without comment, absorbing constraint as carefully as instruction. When the briefing ended, he asked one question. Not for clarification. For limitation. The answer came as a nod. That nod was everything. It defined the boundary. Not what he could do, but what he must not exceed. His limit. Classified not because it was unknown, but because acknowledging it openly would force ethical conversations no one wanted on record. What followed demanded everything the gym could never measure. Grip strength without strain. Endurance without display. Movement in darkness where sound mattered more than speed and restraint mattered more than power. He moved through the operation like intention given form. Others executed their roles cleanly, efficiently. He adjusted margins. Stabilized variables. When pressure built, he redistributed it quietly. When force was required, it was applied precisely and then withdrawn. There was a moment when escalation was possible. When efficiency tempted excess. He felt it clearly, the edge where outcome could tip into spectacle. He chose restraint. Not because he lacked capacity, but because capacity unused preserved balance. Lives remained intact. Structures remained standing. No one would ever know how close it had come to being otherwise. When it ended cleanly. No lingering chaos. No signature. He cleaned his equipment methodically, erased presence where protocol demanded and where instinct insisted. Documentation was minimal, intentionally incomplete. He left without looking back. By morning, he was back in the city. Back in routine. Back in the gym. His muscles ached in unfamiliar ways, soreness that came not from weight but from tension held too long and released too carefully. He lay beneath the bar again. Same plates. Same grip. Same breath. The bar rose, hesitated, and settled back into place. A clean failure. This time, someone stepped closer. A younger man, earnest, uncertain. "Want a spot?" he asked. The offer was genuine. Layered with misunderstanding, but genuine. He considered it carefully. Accepted kindness always carried risk. Refusing it too sharply invited offense. He declined gently, with a small shake of the head and a quiet thank you. The man nodded, reassured by the normalcy of the exchange, and moved on. As he sat up, he understood more clearly than ever why his limit could never be visible. Strength misunderstood became threat. Capability misread became obligation. If people believed you had no ceiling, they would push until something broke, and they would call it necessity. His silence preserved balance. Not just his own, but everyone else's. The gym returned to its rhythm. Mirrors reflected effort without context. Judgment flowed freely, careless and temporary. He moved among it anonymously, carrying weight that could not be named and should never be tested here. Outside, the day unfolded as usual. Cars passed. Conversations overlapped. Somewhere, analysts would dissect outcomes without data, debate methods without insight. Somewhere, files would be updated, limits reaffirmed, his name remaining exactly where it belonged. Redacted. The rumors surfaced the way truth often did when it was not allowed to show its face, abstract, distorted, and safely distant. A successful operation somewhere unnamed. A shift in momentum that analysts could feel but not trace. Articles spoke in passive voice, attributing outcomes to strategy, to timing, to luck. No individuals were mentioned. No methods confirmed. He read none of it directly. Information like that reached him indirectly, filtered through conversations overheard, through silences that lingered too long, through the subtle recalibration of expectations in rooms he was never supposed to enter. The absence of his name was not an oversight. It was confirmation. At the gym, life continued with comforting predictability. The same machines hummed. The same playlists looped. New faces arrived with old confidence, believing strength was something to be demonstrated loudly and often. He returned to his routine as if nothing had occurred, because nothing had, not in a way that could be discussed. The man who once watched him with thinly veiled contempt was there again. This time, the weight on the bar looked ambitious. Too ambitious. Pride had outpaced preparation. He noticed the tremor immediately. Not fear. Instability. The subtle misalignment of grip and intention. Others nearby did not see it yet. They were still admiring the plates. The bar came down faster than expected. The man's elbows flared. His breath panicked. Sound caught in his throat. The moment compressed, that familiar narrowing where injury becomes likely and intervention becomes necessary. Instinct rose cleanly and silently. He stepped in without announcement, hands guiding the bar just enough to stabilize its path. No dramatic rescue. No visible display of force. Just correction. The bar settled. The man exhaled sharply, relief flushing his face with embarrassment close behind. "Thanks," he muttered, surprised. He nodded once and stepped back. No lecture. No reassurance. The moment passed, and with it, any chance of being remembered. Even kindness required calibration. Too much invited curiosity. Too little invited judgment. He gave exactly what the situation required and nothing more. The contrast between worlds sharpened after that. One demanded anonymity to function. The other rewarded display to exist. He lived between them, translating without belonging fully to either. Some nights, the weight of that duality pressed harder than any barbell ever could. Not regret. Just awareness. Awareness that his life would never resolve into a single, simple narrative. That there would always be rooms where he mattered profoundly and rooms where he was entirely forgettable. He accepted that. Acceptance was a form of strength few recognized. The envelope arrived on a quiet evening, slipped beneath his door without sound. No return address. No mockings. He waited an hour before opening it, not from fear but from habit. Timing mattered. Inside, a single sheet of paper. No letterhead. No signature. Just one line of text, precise and clinical, acknowledging a limit exceeded and respected. Not praise. Not gratitude. Confirmation. He read it once. Folded it carefully. Then burned it over the sink, watching the words curl and vanish, leaving nothing but smoke and ash. Evidence had no place here. The next morning, he returned to the gym. Same hour. Same locker. Same gray shirt. He approached the bar with the familiarity of ritual. Same plates. Same grip. Same breath. The lift unfolded exactly as before. The bar rose. Hesitated. Fell back into place. A perfect failure. Mirrors reflected the story people expected to see. A man who tried and did not succeed. A body that lacked something essential. The story was comfortable. It required no further thought. As he wiped down the bench, he caught his reflection and held it for a moment longer than usual. Not searching. Assessing. The mask had become second nature, but it was still a mask. One he chose daily, deliberately. The army knew the truth, catalogued in files that would never surface. Evaluations sealed behind classification levels that assumed consequence. Limits defined not by capability but by policy, by ethics, by what the world was allowed to know. The gym knew only what he allowed it to know. Steel and mirrors, numbers and assumptions. It measured loudly and understood little. Between those two understandings, he lived with precision. He paid bills. He lifted weights. He nodded at strangers. He slept deeply and woke without alarm. Sometimes, late at night, memories surfaced uninvited. Not of violence, but of stillness. Moments where everything balanced on a decision no one else noticed. He let those memories pass without judgment. They had served their purpose. He understood now that restraint was not the absence of strength. It was its refinement. The ability to carry capacity without advertising it. To endure without witness. To succeed without applause. The world rarely celebrated that kind of power. It did not know how. That was fine. He returned the weights to their racks, aligned perfectly, and left the gym without ceremony. Outside, the city moved around him, unaware, unbothered. Somewhere, outcomes held. Somewhere, balance remained intact. And in that quiet continuity, he found something closer to peace than recognition ever could. Years passed without incident, which was the highest measure of success anyone like him could hope for. The world shifted loudly around him, new conflicts, new technologies, new anxieties broadcast in real time, but his own life moved with deliberate quiet. He changed cities when patterns grew too familiar. He changed gyms when faces began to recognize him beyond courtesy. Continuity mattered. So did distance. His body aged subtly, not in the obvious ways people feared, but in deeper recalibrations. Strength folded inward rather than fading. Reflexes sharpened even as movements softened. Where younger men relied on force, he relied on timing. Where others chased records, he preserved margins. His training adapted, evolving away from measurable outputs and toward maintenance of readiness. Nothing wasted. Nothing displayed. In each new gym, the cycle repeated. Curious glances. Mild dismissal. Occasional advice offered with the confidence of those who mistook volume for knowledge. He accepted it all with polite neutrality. The role was familiar now, almost comforting. Weakness, when chosen, was a kind of freedom. Sometimes, he wondered who he might have been if life had taken a different shape. If strength had been encouraged instead of contained. If recognition had not carried risk. The thought surfaced occasionally, usually late at night, and passed just as quickly. There was no resentment attached to it. Only acknowledgement. He had seen what visible power did to people. How it distorted expectations. How it invited demands disguised as opportunity. He had learned early and thoroughly that the most dangerous thing you could give the world was proof without context. On his final visit to one gym before another move, he arrived earlier than usual. The place was nearly empty. Machines stood silent. Mirrors waited patiently. He warmed up slowly, listening to his breath, to the quiet language of joints and tendons. Everything responded. Everything still worked. He approached the bar one last time. Same plates he had always used. Same weight that told the same story. He lay back, set his grip, and inhaled deeply. For a moment, he considered lifting it cleanly. Not for anyone else. Just to feel the truth rise unrestrained. The thought lingered, then dissolved. He pressed the bar upward. It rose smoothly at first, then slowed, then stalled. His muscles engaged precisely, holding the line without strain. The bar hovered, suspended between possibility and performance. Then he guided it back into place. A perfect failure. Controlled. Intentional. Complete. He sat up and felt something like closure settle in his chest. Not relief. Understanding. As he wiped down the bench, a young man nearby watched him with a familiar expression. Confusion layered over judgment. The young man opened his mouth, then hesitated, unsure whether to offer advice or encouragement. He smiled faintly and shook his head, sparing them both the exchange. He gathered his things and walked toward the exit. No one stopped him. No one noticed. That anonymity felt earned. Outside, the air carried the weight of an ending that did not announce itself. He stood for a moment, keys in hand, listening to the city breathe. Cars passed. People hurried. Life continued without pause or permission. Elsewhere, in a place he would never visit again, his file was archived. Limits still classified. Assessments still sealed. His name remained partially obscured, referenced only when necessary, then set aside. The work was done. Not because it had ended, but because it no longer needed him. That, too, was success. He drove away without looking back. The road ahead offered nothing dramatic. Just distance. Just time. In quieter moments, he reflected on what strength had meant across his life. Not the kind measured by applause or etched into record books, but the kind that held under pressure without deforming. The kind that knew when to act and when not to. The kind that carried responsibility without seeking ownership. He understood now that true limits were rarely physical. They were ethical, contextual, human. His greatest discipline had never been training harder, but choosing restraint when excess was available. Choosing silence when noise would have been easier. Choosing to look ordinary so others could remain unaware of what they never needed to know. The Jim had always thought he was weak. That story had served him well. It had allowed him to live quietly, to protect what mattered without explaining why. It had allowed others to feel strong without comparison. It had preserved balance. The army had known better. It had known his limit not as a ceiling, but as a boundary. A line drawn deliberately to protect both sides of it. Classified not out of secrecy alone, but out of respect for consequences that could not be undone once understood. Between those two worlds, he had built a life of intention. Uncelebrated, unremarkable, effective. As years continued to pass, fewer memories demanded attention. The work receded into abstraction, then into principle. What remained was simpler. Wake, train, contribute quietly, rest, repeat. If anyone ever asked him what strength was, he would not have answered with stories or numbers. He would have spoken of balance, of knowing when enough was enough, of carrying capacity without letting it define you. But no one asked. And that, he knew, meant everything had gone exactly as it should.